Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today, we're doing something completely different. I found this PC next to a dumpster a couple weeks ago, and now I've completely transformed it into a Crysis running gaming PC, and I want to share my story. So, let's get into it.
Everything changes.
As soon as I got home, I booted this thing up and it took me straight to Randy's login page. Randy definitely did not wipe the hard drive, but since it booted up, I knew I was good to go. Shout out to Randy, by the way, for sponsoring this video, wherever you are. So after a quick search on Google and a little bit of research, I found out that this baby actually had some upgrade options. First, the AMD Sempron single core CPU could be upgraded to a dual core, and the 1GB of RAM could be upgraded to 4GB. Along with that, there's a PCI Express for a graphics card, and you know I have a bunch of those. The compact Presario came equipped with a 120GB Western Digital hard drive, as well as a 250-watt power supply that I probably shouldn't have messed with, but I kept it in there anyway. And finally, this motherboard came with two SATA ports, believe it or not, so I could unplug the one for the DVD drive and put in a brand new SSD to go with the hard drive that was already in there. So what exactly did I upgrade everything to? First, I upgraded the AMD Sempron 2.0 GHz single core processor to an Athlon 64X2 dual core 2.5 GHz because A, this was the best CPU that their website said the motherboard could handle, and B, my friend Brady actually had this exact CPU lying around his house, so it was a no-brainer. Just so you guys know, I found the CPU on eBay for around $9. Next up, I found out that this motherboard could support 2GB of DDR2 800MHz RAM, so I bought myself a 4GB kit off Amazon. I know some people say that motherboards could handle more than they say, but this is what I went with. I actually bought this 4GB kit new off Amazon for around $25. After upgrading the RAM and the CPU, I decided to install Windows and give this thing a boot just to make sure everything was working. I haven't installed Windows on a non-SSD drive in probably half a decade, so I was absolutely dying for this install. I believe I actually gave up mid-installation and decided I had to throw an SSD in there. I went with the cheapest 128GB SSD I could find on Amazon, which was the ARI 128 for $45. Now at this point, I had an upgraded CPU and RAM, and Windows 10 was installed on a fresh SSD, and everything was working perfectly. At this point, there was only one thing left to do: install a graphics card. The GPU I decided to go with was the GTX 1050 Ti. Was this the best option for this build? Absolutely not. Far from it actually, but it was the best GPU that I own that doesn't require an extra power cable from the PSU. And I was also pretty confident the power supply could handle it. The GTX 1050 Ti has a minimum power supply rating of 300 watts, so I definitely wouldn't try using 250 like I did, but everything worked out for me. That was as far as I got with upgrading this bad boy. After a decent but still kind of lazy dusting and cleaning, I realized that this was pretty much the best I could upgrade this dumpster PC, and it was time for some benchmarks. For reference, when I originally picked up this computer, I couldn't even start a benchmark. The computer ran way too slow, and it would have literally taken me days to get Steam installed, games installed, and even just setting up the graphics settings in-game. Now let's jump into the benchmarks. As you guys can guess, it didn't perform that well with with games that relied heavily on the CPU because that's the clear bottleneck here, but it did do pretty good in the other games. First, I tested it on none other than Crysis 3. From the first moment I saw this PC sitting next to the dumpster, I envisioned this thing one day running Crysis. In 1080p with everything set to the lowest and no anti-aliasing, I was averaging a somewhat respectable 36 FPS. I know this isn't the best thing in the world, but I would definitely consider my goal of dumpster to Crysis a success. Next up, I ran the 2013 Tomb Raider benchmark because that's been a staple in my benchmarking for the past few years so we can compare. In 1080p and ultra settings, I averaged 67 FPS. This one probably surprised me the most. For a similar built-in benchmark, I went with Shadow of Mordor, which was a little trickier, but I'm happy with the results. In 1080p on the medium preset, I averaged 43 FPS in the benchmark. Pretty impressive if you ask me. After that, I tested my luck with none other than For Honor. You guys know I already benchmarked the heck out of this thing with other graphics cards, so I figured we would try a modern 2017 title. It did surprisingly decent. In 1080p with everything to the lowest setting, I got 36 FPS. Rocket League was the next game, and this was a bit of a struggle. Non-graphical games like this tend to rely more on the CPU, so it was actually a stretch to even get this thing to run properly. In 1080p and the visual set to performance, I only got 34 FPS. Keep in mind that I had this same issue with other games like CSGO because the dual-core processor that's almost a decade old just can't handle these types of games well. And finally, to wrap up the benchmarks, I ran 3D Mark's Firestrike and got a score of 3,219. Well, that wraps up my dumpster PC transformation video. I had so much fun making this video for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm so happy to say that I accomplished my goal of turning this dumpster PC into a Crysis gaming computer. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please drop a like down below to help support my channel, and as always, thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more Zach's Tech Turf videos.